Hello everyone. This video is about fundamentals of SQL. This is a conceptual video where we will try to understand what is SQL and various concepts relating to SQL before we actually jump into SQL Workbench. To start with, this will be the agenda for the discussion wherein we'll be taking you through fundamentals of database, which includes what is database and how these databases are represented, and in database types, which includes two major types of databases which are widely used: relational database and NoSQL database. Then we'll try to understand what is DBMS, how it provides an interface between users and databases. SQL, what it is, history and its use. And then we'll also be taking you through basic architecture of a database, creating a database, using a database, and then creating a table. With this basic concepts, we will finish up this video quickly. To move forward, what exactly is a database? So database is simply an organized collection of data, and it's structured data we're talking about. It is all about organized collection of structured data. So we are trying to understand the data that is structured, not the data which has got no structure. So we will try to understand more in depth what exactly is structured data, what type of data is considered as structured. All of that we will try to understand at a later stage. Otherwise, to be simple and to be precise, a database is a collection of data and the data is stored into it. Let's say in the right side window, if you look at here, let's say there is a kind of a database symbol. So this is how the database is usually represented in the cylindrical format, and most of you already know this. So now any data on a day-to-day basis, if you go to any retail outlet, lot of transactions with respect to sales are happening. Lot of transactions relating to inventory, relating to employees, relating to financial transactions, relating to time in, time out. Everything is being generated. So all of this data is being generated in lakhs and lakhs of transactions every hour, and all of this data would be usually stored in an area called database. So database ideally is a kind of a storage location, a physical storage location, or a virtual cloud-based space where you add your data into it. So now what we are trying to understand here, there is a data, there is a storage unit wherein you are putting some data. And while you are entering this data into it, you are ensuring that the data is very well structured. That's what is all about data. And what does this database allow? What does this database allow? Once the data is loaded to it, once the data is loaded here, now a user should be able to see the data whenever he wanted, retrieve the data, see the data, make modifications to the data whenever they wanted. Maybe you should have seen a table created in a tool like Microsoft Excel. You create a table and then you found that there are some mistakes in the records that you have entered, and you are allowed to make modifications to that table. So that's called, editing to the data, updating the data based on the corrections that you would like to make, adding more rows to it or adding more records to it, and removing certain records which you are no more interested into, or maybe duplicate records or records which are wrongly entered. All of these things are allowed. This database actually allows a user to make all such modifications. To speak about very important features of a database, the information is stored in a structured way. We will try to understand what exactly the structured way is. And it is protected from unauthorized access, which means the database which you have created and which you are using will allow you to create certain protection to it. Like every other software tool, even a database helps you give protection to your data and to ensure no unauthorized people will be using this data. And it is easily accessible whenever you need it, and it will be updated and managed efficiently as per the requirement of the user as and when they want the modifications to be done. So that's how the database is all about. And as you start getting into the SQL workbench, you'll try to understand and you'll try to relate whatever we have been discussing. As we create a database on our own, as we start adding data inside the database, you'll try to get more relevancy of what we are talking here. So what is database management system? There is a notion that most of the people feel SQL is a database and SQL is a DBMS. Is it same? It is not actually same. Database and database management system are not exactly same. And SQL is considered to be a database management system, not a database. So let it be very clear, SQL is not a database. SQL is a database management system, which is actually a software. Now, try to understand how is it relevant. Say there is a database. That's what I've told you. The database look like a cylindrical symbol. There is a database in which a lot of data is there in that, and we have a user here. And the user has to enter data into this database. That's what we wanted. So user should be able to enter the data inside it. User should be able to remove the data whenever needed. He should be able to provide security to the data, and user should be able to make modifications to the data. All of that has to be done on the database by the user. But now, is it possible that user directly communicates to the database, or will the database be able to understand the language of a common man or a common woman? Is it possible a common man language is understood by the database? If you ask me, no. A database cannot understand a common language like your own English or any other language. So it needs a translator and it needs a mediator who can communicate to the database based on what we wanted. So this mediator that we call is a DBMS. So DBMS acts as a mediator between user and the databases to manage the database. If a user would like to manage the database, when I say manage, whether it is adding of the data to the database, removal of the data, modifying the data, creating the database for that matter, all of these user will be able to do only through DBMS software. So what exactly is DBMS here? DBMS is a software. So DBMS is just a software that actually interact with users, the software application and the database. So here is a user, here is a software application, and here is your database. So there is interaction between these three elements. That's what a DBMS can do as a software. So this is a DBMS, this is a user, and this is a database. This is your database. So this is how a DBMS is all about. So DBMS, to be precise, DBMS is a database that allows user to interact with the database. DBMS is a software which will allow user to interact with the database and perform operations on the database. And the operations include what? It can be about data storage, data retrieval, and data upgradation. And the user and the program interface is provided by a database management system. It helps you secure your data, and it also maintain integrity, as no unauthorized people will be able to access this data. It also provides you backup and recovery options, as in when there is some data which is deleted by accident, you have a facility to back up the data and you'll be able to recover the data as and when you want it. And there is a strong access control this database software provides you. You should be able to give access to certain users. What kind of a data will this user be allowed to access? And maybe other set of users are given a different types of access to the data. This kind of access management can also be done through this software, which is known as database management system. So to keep it pretty short, a database management system is a software that will help the user to manage the database where lots of data is inside it, in adding the data to it, in creating the database, adding the data to it, modifying the data, or updating the data, or deleting the data, providing protection to it, and giving access to various users. All of this can be done through the database system. So keep reminded that database management system is a software and database is a physical storage location, and user would be managing this database through database management system software. Moving forward, I'll just remove my text here. Yep. So there are two major types of databases, though there are multiple types of databases further to discuss. But then for our learning of MySQL, what we will try to understand, there are two important types of databases. One is relational databases and NoSQL databases, which is also called as non-relational databases. So two types of databases, relational and non-relational. Now, what is relational database all about? A relational database is something where the data is stored in the form of tables. If you are storing the data in the form of tables in a particular database, that database is called relational database, which is more structured in nature. If you are storing your data in the form of database, in the form of tables, those data is a structured data, and the database that is storing this kind of a data is called as relational database. So relational database organizes data in the form of tables, and it is a structured database. If you wanted to work on relational databases in terms of creating database, in terms of adding data, or all the other operations on the database, then you'll have to have a software called database management system. Such softwares include MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, so on. If the data that you have to create is not in a structured format, or it's not in the tabular format, it is in a non-tabular format, maybe in the form of images, maybe in the form of charts and so on, then those type of data is called as unstructured data, and it is not stored in tabular format. So such databases which takes the data inside, and if the data is not structured or not in the form of tables, such databases are called as NoSQL databases or non-relational databases. So if you have to manage these types of databases, you should be able to work on MongoDB is one of the DBMS, or Cassandra is another DBMS. So these are all DBMS softwares: MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, MongoDB, Cassandra. These are all different types of DBMS softwares. And which software to use when is simple. When you are working on a database which is structured, a relational database, then you should be using softwares like MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, and so on. And when you are using a database which is unstructured, that is NoSQL database, then you should be able to use tools are called MongoDB and Cassandra. And for this entire training module, we'll be focusing more towards relational databases, and the tool that we will be using, or the software that we will be learning, is MySQL. And why MySQL? Because this is a software which is in wide use across various organizations. Okay, so that's all about types of databases that you could understand pretty clearly. Then what exactly is SQL here? This is one DBMS software that we have already learned. SQL is a DBMS software that helps you manage the databases, specifically relational databases. So SQL is developed by IBM in the year 1970, and when this is developed, it was named as SQL, SEQL. Now it is called as SQL. Later on, SQL has been named as SQL. Earlier it was SQL when IBM have developed this in 1970s, and SQL is named as Structured English Query Language. Now they have removed English from that, and they've shortened the rest of the things as SQL and called it as Structured Query Language. It's a simple programming language which is very well standardized, with a lot of queries to be written to manage the database. It will help you create database structures. It will help you insert, update, and delete the data inside the database, and write a queries and retrieve specific information that user wants. And you can set permissions and provide access to the databases to different users based upon the requirement of the users. So that's a simple SQL, which is again a software. So our focus is more towards learning SQL in these entire training modules. So the structure of the database is pretty simple. Now a user actually starts with creating a database first. The user should actually start by creating a database first. Once the database is created, how the data is stored inside. As we said, it is a relational database that we were talking about. In the relational database, the data is stored in the form of what? We have already discussed data is stored in the form of tables. Yeah, this is how our table look like. Data is stored in the form of tables. So first thing that you have to create after the database is created, the first thing that you have to create inside is create a table. But a table is not just an empty grid of rows and columns. It is not just an empty grid. If I create a table like this, it does have no value. If you want to create value to the table, it should have a proper structure. Like the columns have to be defined here. In your simple Excel language, the columns have to be created here. Column 1, then you have to enter column 2, then you have to enter column 3, and then you have to enter column 4. So these columns in the SQL language are called as fields. So we call them fields. So a database consists of tables, and the table consists of fields. The first row is always called as fields, and under each field you enter a lot of data in the rows. That's called as records. So the structure is simple. First comes database. Under the database you have tables, and inside the tables you have what? Your fields. Yeah, inside the tables you have fields, and then under the fields, what you have? Enter the data in various rows formats. That's called as records. This is how the structure is while we want to work on a database. So when you open an SQL workbench, you cannot directly start entering the data. For you to enter the data, you need a table structure. For you to create a table structure, you need to have a database. So the first step of any of the SQL learning is to create a database first. Once your SQL workbench is ready on your PC, start creating a database first. Once the database is created, then create a table structure with the respective fields that it comes with. And once the fields are created, then you start entering the data inside the table. This is the basic structure of creating a database and entering data inside the database through SQL. To move forward, this is a simple coding structure that I would like to show you. You see here, creating your first database includes, this is how it's as simple as an English language. SQL is as simple as an English language, and it is very easy for the users to learn, which is why SQL is in prominence when it compares to all the other database management systems. So SQL, say the first step, as we have discussed in the previous slide, it starts with creating a database, and the query looks like create database, and the name of the database here in this example is bookstore. So bookstore is the name of the database. The moment I run this program, the moment I run this particular statement, it will create the database with the name bookstore. And this semicolon in the query, this entire line is not considered a program. It is called as a query as per the language of SQL. We call it a query. Once this query is run, then it will create a database, and you can see in the storage space the database by name bookstore is created. You can easily see that. Now, why is this semicolon needed? In your English language, usually at the end of every sentence, what we put? Yes, what we put there? Yeah, we put a full stop. As we put the full stop, the language understands that this is the end of this particular statement. Similarly, by mentioning a colon, semicolon here, the computer understands, or the SQL window understands, that my query is end here. And then we can go on running the program, running this particular query. So creating a database is done through create space database space bookstore and then semicolon to instruct that this is the end of the program. In a similar way, if you feel the database is of no use and accidentally you have created a database with wrong naming, then what you can do, you can just go and drop the database. Drop is nothing but deleting the database, and the syntax remains same. Instead of create, you have mentioned drop space database space bookstore, and then the moment this line is run, whatever the database is created with the name bookstore is now deleted. So this is how the queries are written in SQL window, SQL workbench, and it is as simple as English language that you can see. Now, the most important thing you need to remember is SQL queries are not case sensitive. Here I've written create database and drop database in uppercase and the database names in the small case, lowercase. It doesn't mean that it has to be like that, not necessary. Even the entire query can be written in lowercase or the entire query can be written in the uppercase and it will accept. But it is a nomenclature, as the experts of the programs, they always suggest that you create all your keywords, all your key elements into capitals and the names are into small letters, so that it makes easy for people to understand it. It highlights the keywords of your program very easily, which is why it is advisable that use all your queries keywords into uppercase and the names in lowercase. And then say for example, now we have only used the first query we have used, and there is a database created by name bookstore. Now the bookstore database is created here. Once the database is created, now you have to tell the computer whatever the further programmings I'm going to write, and these programmings are going to help me create and work on this particular database called bookstore. Otherwise, let's say your storage has got so many databases, and as you write so many queries on your workbench, the computer doesn't understand or your software doesn't understand this query is written on which database. So to instruct the system, you need to reuse this particular keys, you need to use this particular query, use database bookstore, which means this will give an instruction to the computer that further whatever the queries I'm writing, those are for the bookstore database. And then I go to create table books. So create table is a major keyword, and then books is the name of the table that I wanted to create in this database. And then under the books, I'm trying to tell what kind of a fields I have: book ID, title, author, price, and published dates. I am telling a table should contain what kind of a fields or columns. As per your Excel language, you call it columns. In SQL, we call them fields. So these are the various fields I wanted this table to contain, and the table name is books, and the fields inside should be book ID, title, author, price, published date. And these are called as data types. The computer should know when I say book ID, what kind of information I have to accept. So as a user, I have created the table and someone else is entering the data. Let's say they are entering under the ID BOOK1, whether it is acceptable, what kind of ID it should accept, whether the ID number should be entirely numbers or it should be the combination of numbers and characters, or it should be entirely characters, what it should be. That has to be properly defined. Here it is very well defined as int. Correct? So that's called integer. Similar way, varchar will accept strings, which includes the words and characters. Again, here it is a varchar. Decimal considers numbers with decimal points, which means because it is relating to price, usually the price contains rupees, and also in terms of decimal points, you see, let's say 100 rupees 20 paise, 3 rupees 50 paise. So the pricing is always in terms of decimals. It's not just rupees, it is also into paisa, which is why they put decimal numbers here. On the date has to be in a proper format, so you define date into the date format. These are all database data types. There are so many data types in for you to learn in SQL, but for this basic SQL training, we will try to understand most important data types that you need to learn. So these are the most important data types which are self-explanatory. Say for example, character. Character is a data type that explains you about characters. It's just only alphabets that you will be able to take. So this is a character which by default has a length of 0 to 255 characters. It will take. Varchar is also a kind of a characters on words. It's a string, to be very precise, and it will take the size of up to 0 to 65,535. The length of this characters that a user can enter is that much when it is defined as varchar. Of course, you will have to define the size of it. Say for example, I enter 100 here, then the varchar, this particular field where I have defined as varchar, will not take the length of more than 100. So that way there are various data types which you need to learn, read, self-read, and try to understand what are these. And as we start working on the workbench program, you'll get more understanding about each of these data types. So we will learn data types as we start working on the creation of tables. So that's all for this particular video, and in my next video I'll take you through the SQL workbench practically, where we'll try to see how to create a database, how do we write a query, and then we'll try to use the database for creating tables, inserting data into the table, and furthermore practically on a SQL workbench. That's all for now. Thank you so much.